Welcome to Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura, and blue for Christmas is a beautiful color. And I have found a beautiful blue fabric that's going to come together and make a beautiful Christmas quilt. This beautiful blue fabric is from Northcott, and it's called Christmas Joy. It has those beautiful, luxurious blues, and they have some beautiful blues and soft whites in snowflakes and in a solidish. Now, if you're not into blues, they also have it in red. So the quilt is going to start with our very basic shapes, and I will be binding it with that beautiful gold. So to start with, we are going to need to cut 120 2.5-inch squares. We are going to need 60 squares of blue and white at 3¼ inches or 3½. This stack we're going to turn into half square triangles that need to be trimmed to 2½ inches. We then are going to make a cat's cradle. But let's start and make our half square triangles. We're going to put those right sides together and make this half square triangle in the traditional way. Draw a line from point to point, and then we're going to stitch on each side of that line. When we do that and pull that back, we're going to have those half square triangles, and they need to be trimmed down to 2½ inches. Now, I like to start my squares at 3¼ inch and then trim them down. But 3½ inches is also a popular size to start off with. So whatever you're comfortable with, we're going to need 60 each of the white and the blue, or whatever color you have chosen. When all of those half square triangles are done, we're going to sew them up with those solid squares. And we're going to put them together so that the darker part of the triangle is going to go along the edge of one of those squares. And we're going to do all pieces like this. So we're going to have 120 pieces that'll look like this. Once all of those little pieces are stitched together, we're going to be able to stitch these in sets of 2. And this time we want the blue points pointing together. And that's going to give us a block at 4½ inches. And we will end up with 60 of these units. With all of our little bow tie blocks done, we're going to be able to work on the next block. And the next block is going to be a cat's cradle. Now, there are specialty rulers that you can get to make this, but I'm going to show you a way that will take just some regular rulers. So to make this, we need to start with some strip sets. The fabric has been cut through the width of the fabric, and we need 3 inches for that blue and 4 inches for the white. We're going to sew those together and press towards this lighter color. We're going to be able to subcut those so they're 3 inches. And we're going to need a total of 60 of these units. We will then be able to take 2 of these units and sew them together along that long edge. When we do sew them together, the edges are going to match up, but the centers are not going to match up, and that's exactly what we're looking for. Before we do any pressing, we're going to fold those in half, and we're going to snip a little bit along that fold. We want to snip right to that seam, and if you hit that seam line, that's fine too. Once that is snipped, when we go to open it up, it wants to go in this direction, and that's exactly what we want. And that little cut is going to allow us to press it going in both directions. So we now have 30 of these units with that little cut in the center. We're going to match that up with the solid blue, and this is cut 6½ inches by 7½ inches. And it's going to match that. If it's not exact, that's fine because it is going to be trimmed down. We need to draw 2 lines to stitch on. Right here where we have that little intersection is where the line's going to go along one side and along the other. Now that line is going to be a stitching line, so we do want to use a water-soluble marker, a pencil, or something that will fade out. We need to draw a 45-degree line. So we can use any ruler that has that 45-degree mark on the ruler. So I'm going to take that 45-degree mark and I'm going to match it up to one edge, and I want it to match that intersection. And I'm going to slide that ruler until it matches that intersection. Now I can draw a line. And this line is that stitching line. Flip this, do that second side. The edge is matching up on the 45. I want my pencil point to go right in that corner and mark. And there's that intersection right there at the point that we want to stitch right over. Now that those two lines are drawn, I can match up my rectangles, go to the machine and stitch down on those two lines. And I do want to get right to that intersection. Once that's stitched, we can cut down the center. So press the seam, going towards the blue, and now we can square this up to 4.5 inches. If you have a 4.5 inch ruler, this is a great time to use it. I'm going to use that diagonal line and a center point. And I can see where this block is straight with the numbers. So now I'm going to be able to square that up. And a rotating mat is definitely good to use for this. So I now have that perfect 4.5 inches. If you do not have a 4.5 inch ruler, you can use a long ruler. But what I would recommend is for you to mark that ruler. So I have made a 4.5 inch mark, a diagonal line, and a line where that little blue square is going to sit. So I have 2.25 with that cross line. Now when I put this down, I'm not having to count, and I'm going to make sure that I don't make any mistakes. I have that ruler tape right along the blue square. I can straighten up that 45-degree angle and trim my first edge. Once that edge is done, we're going to be able to rotate it and finish trimming it. Having those little marks will definitely save some time. To make our quilt block, we need to take that cat's cradle and have the square points pointing out so the triangles are facing in. Those squares are going to follow right along that line. And that is the block. When this is sewn together, it will be 8.5 inches. And we will have 30 of these blocks. And we're going to be able to put them together a few different ways. This is the way I'm going to be putting them together. But you can always put them together this way. So it's nice to know that there's more than one way we can do this. When I put those blocks together, I'm just going to have every other block turned. So my blue corners are going to match up and my white corners. So let's get our 30 blocks together so that we can get the quilt together. I've chosen this layout for my quilt, which will consist of putting 4 blocks together with that dark in the center, and I will need 6 of these. I will need 3 that only have 2 pieces. So I'm going to have 3 rows. Each row will have one of these at the edge, the big 4 patch, and another 4 patch. So I'm always sewing these solid blocks together. So I'll make 3 rows like this, and then I'm going to be able to sew those rows together. Once all of those blocks are stitched together, I'm going to add a 3-inch border. I'm going to start with the top, and the measurement will be 40.5 inches. Once that top border has been put on, we can put on the sides. And if you've done the same pattern, the side will equal 53.5 inches. But be sure to check on those measurements before you cut your fabric and put them on. Once we have those two sides done, the top of the quilt is done. So the quilt was only made with two different fabrics, which means we have a lot of different possibilities that we can turn this quilt into. And it all started with a simple little bow tie block and a cat's cradle block. Now, if you want to follow along and make this quilt, I would recommend 2 yards of each of the fabrics, the blue and the white. And if you're going to do a binding, you'll need to add in about 3/4 of a yard. And of course, you can make this quilt a lot bigger or just turn it into a really nice Christmas table runner. And from a distance, this quilt does not look like Christmas fabric. It just has a beautiful blue and white sparkle to it. I'll put some links in the description to the fabric line. And thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and I do have a newsletter, all free under Sew Very Easy. Thanks for joining me. Bye for now.